Hello, Venerable Yeshe. How are you?
Hi, I'm so sorry. Welcome everyone to the Buddhism in the Time of COVID. It's wonderful to have all our esteemed guests here. I apologize for the technical difficulties and I appreciate you staying up maybe to attend this conference on Australian Eastern Standard Time. So I think everybody's sound is working, is that correct?
Yes.
Bhante?
Where are you from, by the way?
I'm from Australia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I think we should just get straight into it. My name's Ayya Yeshe, and we've all been very inspired by the wonderful Dharma talks you've given. So Venerable Saranapala is a mindfulness teacher, president of Canada, a Mindful and Kind Nation Dharma group, and he has also received awards for community service from the Canadian government. Welcome, Venerable.
Thank you.
Okay. Bhante Suddhaso is trained in the Thai forest tradition and the Soto Zen tradition and is the co-founder of Buddhist Insights and Empty Cloud Monastery. He trained at Tassajara and Abhayagiri monasteries. His teachers include Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Viradamo, and he has taught at Harvard, New York University, and many others. And he has lived in a variety of Buddhist monasteries. And our wonderful nun, Ayya Soma, is also the co-founder of Buddhist Insights and Empty Cloud Monastery. She's ordained in the Theravada tradition and runs Buddhist Insights, which is a non-profit organization connecting people with monastics. She has gained inspiration from her many teachers, from Venerable Panyavati Bhikkhuni, Rabina Corton, and Kemmo Drolma. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we find ourselves in a time of unprecedented challenge. How have you all been coping personally with what's going on?
You want me to start with me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, we have been locked down for a month now. We stopped all the programs, canceled all the programs. But compared to the United States, Canada is doing still much better. We are being mindful of social distancing. We monks are staying inside the temple. It has been a month now, but it was a good timing for us. We are doing chanting for the whole world, and since people can't come here, and since we can't go out, so using the technology, I'm visiting many people every day, doing one hour mindfulness sessions for the adults and half an hour meditation session for the tweenies and teens. That's why you can see I just finished the teen meditation.
Okay.
And I couldn't change my background, so I just left it like that. And so I need to go for our daily chant. There are a lot of people who wait for us at 8 o'clock. So I will be able to be here with you all for next 20 to 25 minutes.
Thanks, Bhante. And how about Ayya Soma and Bhante Suddhaso? How are you guys coping in America? You're kind of in the heart of it over there in NYC.
Yes. Well, we're right outside New York City these days. So where the monastery is, it's kind of like this peaceful oasis, but we are right at the edge of like actually quite the disaster, to use. Actually, even doesn't even give the idea of what is happening right now in New York City to actually use the disaster word. It's much worse than that. But as we were telling Bhante earlier, we're at Empty Cloud Monastery that now it's very empty too. So we don't have programs, we don't have retreats, we don't have many people coming as before. Actually, we don't have anyone coming and visiting, but we have a few residents. So we're currently 5 people living at the monastery. And it's been a time actually where we been both a little bit shocked by what happened. I am also originally from Italy, so the sort of major disaster after China happened in Italy. So I kind of was seeing it coming here in New York City as well. So it's been a gradual kind of countdown, and a lot of friends and family have been affected by this virus so far. So it's been obviously taxing on an emotional level, but at the same time, it's also been a great opportunity to actually look at myself and go, well, what can we do here? And so as monastics, the first thing that we can do is to be of benefit to people is to offer the Dharma. So we have been offering, actually Bhante is a tireless teacher, so he's been teaching literally every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, offering sutta study and Dharma talk and support however he could. And I've helped out a little bit in that domain as well. And yeah, just being present with also the family. So present, obviously not physically, but in however other way that has been available. So we're quite grateful also to the technology that we have during this pandemic. That was not an option in the previous disasters, that has been able to create a kind of support network for all people involved. So quite grateful for that. And we have also another friend joining us. Little
And Bhante, how are you doing, Bhante Suddhaso? Just briefly, because we'd like to get into some of these action points.
Yeah, well, personally, the main stabilizing thing for me has been sticking to the monastic routine. So keeping a pretty solid schedule going every day so that we're still doing chanting and meditation and study, and so observing our ordinary routine. So that helps to give that sense of ongoing stability. And this is something that I've been encouraging people who are who come to our live sessions on YouTube, or who talk to us through various messaging systems, like really encouraging them to use this kind of daily schedule for themselves as well, because it's what keeps us solid and stable in these kinds of uncertain times. And as Ayya Soma mentioned, also taking the opportunity then to really build up a stronger online presence, so providing more live online Dharma services for people to connect with. So that's actually what's been giving me strength. So my own internal strength through following a solid monastic schedule, and also then through using online platforms to support other people around the world.
Wonderful. So is there something we can learn from this pandemic? Like, how can we employ self-care and peace at this time? Bhante Saranapala, would you like to tackle that one?
Well, this is the thing. One principle that I'm popularizing in the world for years, that is the kindfulness. I think being kind to oneself during the difficult time is very important. And also being kind to others is also very important. Now, this kindness that we talk about is coming from the Pali word karuna, compassion. Karuna is to feel not only others' pains, it is also to feel your own pain. This is the most difficult time. And during this difficult and painful time, we all have to be mindful to be kind to ourselves. We need to take care of ourselves. Now, there are many ways to take care of ourselves. Now the government was encouraging this social distancing and not to practice social gathering. And we paid attention to that. We were mindful. Immediately, we canceled all the programs. And because we also need to protect ourselves. We have a moral obligation to save our own life. When we save our own life, it becomes a way of saving other people's life. That is beautifully explained by the Buddha in one of the suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the Satipatthana Samyutta. And is it looking after yourself is a way of looking after others. Looking after others is a way of looking after yourself. And this is purely mindfulness practice. And during this difficult time, we have to look after ourselves. And then once we survive, once we do well, remain healthy, and once this difficult time is gone, then we can go back to the field to be there for everyone. But we show our compassion through the technology. I say we monks are trying our best to give our presence, especially for me, 3 times a day, uh, conducting mindfulness sessions for the adults, 1 hour, from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And then I was also thinking of the children, the preteens and teens, because they have no school, and they're staying home, they can't go outside. And also it must be very difficult for parents to look after the kids 24 hours. So you need to feel parents' pain. And then some parents actually talk to me, the Bhante, can you, if it is not too much for you, is it possible for you to do at least half an hour session for the kids? And then I started that. And this is how we can show our kindness to the people. And then we also doing the chanting to give the spiritual comfort, to bring the light, hope, and wisdom to the people, encouraging people to understand this true nature of existence, which is the impermanence.
Yeah,
So
well said.
if we can understand this impermanent nature of existence, and then all we have to do is just be patient with ourselves,
Yeah,
be kind, and do your own practice, and then try your best to be there for others in whatever you could.
well said. Suddenly, I think a lot of people are not used to having so much time on their hands. It's like suddenly they are living the life of a monastic or a medieval peasant where they can't roam very far from their home. They've lost a lot of things that they normally distract themselves with. It's like our lives have radically simplified, and money can't alleviate our situation in many ways because we can't spend it. We can't go out, although there's online. But I think suddenly people are really confronted with just looking at their own mind, their own restlessness. There's no escape. All of the things they normally use to distract themselves and identify themselves with have gone. So it's this wonderful opportunity to develop a spiritual practice to look inside, even though, you know, there's the threat of death and so many scary things, which in a way is also an invitation to go within. And for mental health, there is an invitation to connect with friends and family online, despite the difficulties, as we've discovered. So Bhante Suddhaso and Ayya Soma, how do you think we can soothe anxiety and loneliness? Some people have said that they felt great grief for the suffering of others. How can they soothe their minds and worry about their families, their job loss and all of that? Do you have any suggestions?
You want to go first?
No, you go.
Okay. Well, I would say going back, this is actually a great opportunity to really look at the Four Noble Truths. So all the core teachings of the Buddha. So there is suffering, and right now there is, it's a great opportunity to actually really understand what suffering means, both inside of ourselves and outside of ourselves. So it's we cannot overlook the disaster that is happening due to the pandemic, and also our mental reactions to it. So a lot of times when times are quote unquote normal, we tend to relate to suffering in a little bit of a different way. That's why there's lots of different translations, like stress. Oh, I'm stressed out a little bit right now. Or there's dissatisfaction. Well, right now I can say that we're all like really suffering, like truly suffering. Sickness and death is there. It's real. And what is the cause? The cause is greed. The cause of this pandemic is greed, but also the cause of climate change is greed. So it's something that won't end with this pandemic. It's something that we actually really have to face and see. So I think this is a great opportunity to look deeply at the first two noble truths, but then also remembering that there's the Buddha was kind enough to give us also the third noble truth, which is the end of suffering is something concrete and possible. And the way to get out of suffering is by following the Noble Eightfold Path. So really committing to the spiritual path fully, and not for only ourselves, not as a simple way of approaching it as mindfulness stress reduction, but rather pursuing the spiritual path for the cessation of suffering of all beings. So as Bhante Saranapala has mentioned, karuna, compassion, like really, just as the coronavirus is contagious, so is the karuna virus, very contagious. So actually really putting an effort in developing and sharing and nurturing what is worth nurturing, and uprooting what is poisonous. So that's okay.
So Bhante Suddhaso, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so the main thing that comes to mind for me for addressing both of those issues is mindfulness of the body. So maintaining constant, intense awareness of one's own body all day long. So keeping one's attention fully immersed in the body, totally focused on the body. Because anxiety and loneliness both arise from thinking. They both arise from misdirected mental activity. So mental activity which brings us into unpleasant and difficult states of mind. So if we keep our attention firmly grounded in our direct physical experience moment by moment, then we won't experience either anxiety or loneliness. The mind becomes very peaceful and stable and clear. Because actually, what's going on these days, there's all this terrible news and awful things happening around the world, and there's no denying that. But then what happens for many people is that then they just start sitting there and thinking endlessly about it. And the more they think about it, the more agitated they get, the more worried they get, the more anxious they get, the more uncomfortable they get. And also thinking about the fact that they can't go out and see their friends, and they can't go out and see their family, and they can't go to the temple, and they can't go to the library, and they can't go to the park. It's like, then that loneliness comes up because they're thinking about the fact that they can't do these things. But actually, most of our time, we're not going out and doing things. We actually most of us spend many hours every day at home, and we're perfectly fine with that because we're not thinking about the fact that we aren't out doing other things. So cultivating mindfulness of the body and becoming friends with your own body, becoming friends with this physical experience, and accepting that this physical experience, just as it is totally okay. Not only is it okay, it's magnificent, it's wonderful, it's sublime, it's blissful. Then there's no anxiety, there's no loneliness, and there's no boredom. So this is what I really recommend as the most direct way to address these issues. There's more subtle ways depending on the nature and intensity of one's emotional dukkha, but this is the most direct way.
Thank you, Bhante. So we've discussed the benefits of having a routine, of developing a regular meditation practice, of staying in touch with friends and family by video chat or phone calls. We've also discussed the soothing benefits of loving kindness. And Bhante Saranapala said, if you can't go outside, you can always go inside. And we have a moral obligation to bring hope and love. So Bhante, how can we grow our compassion and paramis and be of benefit in these times where we can't always go out?
Well, this is already, we are doing it through the technology. See, we are having a conference, global conference. Those who are coming, joining us, and by listening to what we are saying, that will give them, wisdom, insight, right? And this is the best way to help people. Like, you can help people in so many ways. And as Buddha said to us, gift of Dhamma excels all other gifts. And at this time, we are giving peace of mind through the practice of meditation, conducting this online session. We are sharing Dharma. We are giving the gift of insight and wisdom to people to understand. And this is how we are able to encourage people to deal with their own mental health. And in fact, this is helping them big. You name it, adults, kids, everyone can benefit from meditation. And even that's why we are doing daily chanting, giving it Facebook Live. There are a lot of people who come and join us, and they are receiving a huge relief, and they find hope. And this is from our side, this is what we can do spiritually and emotionally. And of course, we want to give our physical helping hand to people to help, but we can go out and let's say we are living with a group. Now I want to go. I do a lot of programs like do soup kitchens, do sharing caring program, and then this is how we show our compassion in action. And then we also encouraging people that we know. Let's even here in Canada, also in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in India, whoever we know, especially those who are rich people, we are just encouraging them to help out those who are in need. And this is how we can show compassion in action.
Wonderful. So just an invitation.
I need to go now.
Okay, thanks, Bhante.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Take care.
So just an invitation to people who are watching online, there is a Q&A box down the bottom in the middle of your Zoom driver screen or icon screen. So feel free to write a question for us. Ayya Soma and Bhante, there are some questions that have been raised. Somebody asked us to speak about the simile of the arrow, the Sala Sutra, I believe it's called. And also they said, is there anything we can chant to overcome sickness? And also, how is this virus related to greed? So.
Well, maybe I'll start with addressing the Sala Sutta. So the Sala Sutta is, it's about, the central simile is of someone who is pierced by a thorn or a dart or an arrow. And then they immediately stab themselves a second time. And the simile the Buddha is giving here is that the first wound is physical pain. It's something that we can't really avoid. It's something which is just part of having a body. But the second wound is mental pain that is self-inflicted by being negative and aversive and resistant towards the physical experience. So the way I would relate that to this situation is recognizing that there is, for those of us who are healthy, there is this disaster going on, and the news of this disaster can be quite upsetting. But we don't need to inflict further mental suffering on ourselves. We don't need to make ourselves suffer even more. So we recognize that there's something terrible happening, and we do the best we can to help. So for example, Ayya Soma has been helping with fundraising for medical supplies in Italy, which is wonderful. Another one of the temples here in New York City has been fundraising for medical supplies both in Italy and New York City, which is doubly wonderful. So those are things that we can actually practically do, of course. But we really need to make sure that we're not making it harder for ourselves than it needs to be. So as I was speaking about earlier, this tendency to constantly rev up our internal anxiety and dukkha engine, well, that's not really doing us any good. So yeah, just settling down, recognizing that there is this awful thing happening, but this is also the way things are. And we can choose whether we're going to continue to be peaceful and happy or not. And when we put it like that, choose to be peaceful and happy, choose to not be peaceful and happy, it's not really a difficult choice. On the surface, it's not difficult. In actuality, it can be quite challenging because we're fighting our own habits, and our own habits are mostly pretty deranged and perverse, which is why we so often choose disturbance and unhappiness rather than peace and happiness. So those are my thoughts that come immediately to mind. If you are someone who's actually sick, physically ill, then the simile is even more relevant, because then you have the physical pain of being sick, but you have the choice whether to be peaceful with that pain or to be disturbed and upset by it. And this also is where our meditation practice and our mindfulness of the body practice comes to our rescue. Because the more we've developed mindfulness of the body and equanimity through our meditation practice, the easier it is to endure physical pain and illness without creating mental pain. So those are my thoughts on the matter.
Okay. Ayya Soma.
So I will address why it's the cause of greed. I seem to understand that was one of the questions of the pandemic.
Is the pandemic caused by greed? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say actually it's caused by greed, hatred, and delusion, like pretty much all all suffering. So you can see it from the actual initial cause. That is connected with the basically the condition of how we have been torturing animals extensively in the past decades. So with the industrialization of food, and then also with the constant carelessness with animals, just seeing them as food, as something utilitarian that is there for our consumption. Every single pandemic or disease that has happened in the past couple of decades, so the other coronavirus, the SARS, to mad cow disease, to Ebola, it's all connected with animals and with our treatment of animals. So from that all the way to how we are actually dealing in our societies with the actual virus coming. So it's incredible to see the same exact pattern happening in every single Western country, from Italy being one of the first ones, all the way to the United States, even though we knew in the United States sort of the cause and consequences, they were apparent, but when it's happening to someone else, we have the delusion that is not happening to us. So our greed is stronger than our actual common sense. And so there was such a focus, obsession, there still is, on keeping the economy going, on keeping the consumption going, that there was there still is actually to a certain extent, discard of human life, of even conversations about who cares about the elderly, they're going to die anyway, so let's just get the virus to take course. So all of these are, I mean, how can it not be the cause of greed, hatred, and delusion? But namely greed, obviously, like is apparent, it's so obvious. So that's why I think it's a really helpful time right now, this apocalypse, to really see how our actions are influencing our experience and how horrible the consequences are. So we have a sort of idea that this pandemic will be over at a certain point, but we still have to deal with the consequences of climate change. And we really need to, assess as human beings how, if we keep, the same actions going, the consequences will be more and more impactful in a negative way. So yeah, I would say that's my long story long answer to.
Thanks, Ayya. So I think it is interesting with the pandemic because there are so many other issues that we're seeing. I mean, for example, with basically the economy is frozen and we're kind of questioning, is capitalism a system that cares for the benefit of human rights and humanity and, and well-being? We see the problem of because America's healthcare is privatized, people don't have, health workers don't have proper equipment, or they're being charged hospitals are being charged outrageous amounts for equipment that could keep them safe and should be a human right. And, the difference between rich people's access to healthcare and poor people's access to healthcare. But in many ways, the coronavirus also shows us, it strips away privilege. It shows us that we're all vulnerable, we're all going to die, we all suffer, no matter how much money or how much prestige we wrap ourselves in, whatever we hide behind, beauty, youth, big name, fame, whatever, we are all vulnerable. And so it's leveling us in many ways, although still, for many people in developing countries, self-isolation is a privilege. And I certainly know that many people in India are greatly suffering because they can't, they live on a daily wage and they've run out of food and savings. So people have also asked some other questions. I just wanted to add as well that there are many kinds of meditation we can also do to calm our mind. For example, contemplating the merits we've done in our life, lives we might have saved, generosity that we've done, the meaningful relationships we've had with others, the retreats we've done, the generosity that we've made. And this also can give us a sense of refuge and peace. And it's very important, as well as staying in touch with the suffering, to maintain your equilibrium, your equanimity, so that if you're meditating, you're calming your breath, you're cultivating an inner source of joy, peace, refuge. And from that source of joy and peace and refuge, you have the resilience you need. Resilience is very important in this time to deal with the challenge of having your life threatened and your whole life turned upside down, and just be okay with feeling what you feel, but noticing thoughts, feelings come and go, that you have suffering. You are not your suffering, but also not spiritually bypassing, because it's okay to feel anxious and afraid and depressed and bored, and that's all, natural. But we can also do something to change our mind, control our mind, by developing states of joy like loving kindness and rejoicing. So somebody asked, is there something we can chant to overcome sickness like the Ratana Sutta? And how can I practice when I feel physical desire for hugs and other things, when I'm isolated? How can I deal with that?
Well, first off, there's many chants which are traditionally used in Buddhism as protections against illness. So in the Theravada world, the Ratana Sutta is one of the more well-known ones, but there's also many others which are associated with protecting from illness. One which I'm personally fond of is the Atanatya Paritta, which is calling on the names of 28 past Buddhas, as well as many different protective devas and earth devas and sky devas and all sorts. So that one's one that I really like. In English, it's commonly called the 28 Buddhas protection. And in the Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions as well, there's a whole variety of protective chants that one can do. What I would say though is that the really important thing with any of these chants is the state of mind that accompanies it. So if you just chant the Ratana Sutta just as some string of meaningless syllables and you're just doing it because some monk told you to, well, I mean, that's something, but it's not very much. Much more powerful is if before chanting, you bring up this intention, this firm resolution, may all beings be healthy and safe. By this chanting, by the merit of these holy words, may all beings be healthy and safe. Then as you do the chanting, keep that intention very strong in your mind, very powerful in your mind, with an attitude of gentleness and kindness and compassion. And then also after you're done chanting, again, reset that resolution, like really firmly remind yourself of what you just did, really firmly bringing up that intention again of wishing for all beings to be happy, healthy, and safe. This makes it much more powerful. So it's not just the words that have power, but it's our mind state that we produce while doing the chanting that's even more powerful. And what was the other part of the question?
It was how to deal with like a physical desire, you know, maybe needing hugs or other things for being isolated, you know.
Do you want to talk about that?
No, you can do it.
Well, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that that desire itself is what's making us uncomfortable. It's not the lack of hugs and touch that's making us unhappy. It's our desire for hugs and touch that's making us unhappy. So one very direct remedy for that is to look at the desire itself, not the object of the desire, but look at the wanting. You can also hug yourself, as Ayya Yeshe is showing. Look at the wanting and see how uncomfortable the wanting is. And notice that the wanting is something that we're doing, which means it's something we can stop doing. So that's something which can be very powerful. So this is called contemplating the drawback or contemplating the disadvantage. Another option is to just devote your attention to something else. So bring up the recollection of the Buddha, recollecting the wholesome qualities of the Buddha. Start contemplating the Dhamma. Think about elements of Dhamma that you've learned. Actually, maybe go and pick up a Dhamma book and start reading it. Or read some suttas, or look up a Dhamma talk online. Or maybe reach out and connect with some of your fellow practitioners. Send them a text message. Say, what's up? How are you doing? What have you read lately that was inspiring or that brought joy to your mind? So just redirect your attention to something more wholesome. And then you'll notice that the desire starts to fade away just because we're not fueling it anymore. So when we stop fueling the desire, it starts fading out. Just like when you stop putting wood on a fire, eventually it burns itself out and goes cold. The same, you stop putting fuel on the desire and eventually it burns out. Okay?
Thank you. So I think, sorry, Ayya.
Oh, I just wanted to add a few things. That it's also a great opportunity to actually practice self-love, like really. So Ayya did a really cute self-hug, but actually seriously, like self-hug. Bring yourself out on a date. Out, by out, I mean like in the living room or something, or in the kitchen. But yeah. Do get one of the guided meditations on self-metta that Bhante Suddhaso teaches so wonderfully, and really practice. May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, and see you have someone to love, to hug, to take care of. It's right there. It's always there. Just forget.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways we think this is unprecedented, but really suffering is always there. It's just more in the periphery, whereas now it's very much in our face because we've had our choices taken away. But, you know, subtle forms of suffering are always there. And, you know, this is just a chance to develop some kind of inner connection to wholeness that makes looking for external validation or security in a changeable, unconditioned world, you know, we realize that world can't be relied on. So this is our chance to go inside and find that unconditioned, deathless connection, so to speak. And if we have that connection, we kind of lose interest in seeking outside for fulfillment or validation. And it's not that we suddenly become a very unloving person. It's actually that we're complete, and therefore we're naturally overflowing with kindness and compassion for others as well. Mm-hmm. So somebody also asked, how can we practice observing the mind when we're stressed and the thoughts are coming very fast, like lightning?
All right, well, I can share how I address it. So the question is, when there is a restless mind, is that?
Yeah, when the thoughts are coming so fast that it's hard to observe the mind.
Well, first of all, actually observe the mind while it is in this state. So know a restless mind for being a restless mind and not wanting it to be different. So really understanding, what does it feel like? So instead of going, oh, my mind is so restless, oh my God, when it's going to be peaceful, when it's going to be peaceful, okay, in breath, out breath, blah, 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 peaceful, 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 just go, okay, my mind is a mess right now. There's a lot of restlessness. Let me figure out what a restless mind feels like. Let me stay in this with this mind right now without wanting it to be any different. So that goes with anything that we're experiencing. First and foremost, we need to understand our experience before we can create any conditions for our future experience to be different. So Venerable Drime, who's actually a Tibetan monastic, once said this beautiful thing that really made an impression in my mind, which is we cannot control the consequences, but we can control the causes. So if we're experiencing a restless mind, it's because we've created the conditions for our mind to be restless. So in the moment that it's restless, we can't really do anything about it. Actually, hating it creates more, wanting it to be different, creates more causes for a restless mind to reappear in subsequent moments. So what we want to do is stop fueling it. Instead of like pouring gas on the fire, we actually like let go of the gas, of the tank of gas, and we just stay with the sort of fire. And at a certain point, it will extinguish by itself because we're not creating further causes for the same consequences to appear. But in order to do that, to create different causes, we need to see the consequences. We need to see whatever our experience is and learn from it.
Very true. I think there's also that saying, you know, idle hands are the devil's workers. That if we can keep ourselves in a routine, keep our minds directed towards a virtuous object, you know, the Buddha called it right effort, like cultivating virtuous and right meditation, cultivating and right mindfulness, cultivating virtuous states that have not yet arisen, maintaining virtuous states of mind that have arisen, and you know, letting go of unwholesome states that have arisen. And I think I can't help myself as a Mahayana monastic, because we talked about Theravadan options for meditation and soothing yourself in these hard times. There's some wonderful practices like Tonglen, which is, just breathing in a difficult experience and sending it a lot of space and transformation, and using that suffering as a cause of developing compassion and bodhicitta, the wish to liberate all beings and become a Buddha. So there's a wonderful book by Pema Chodron called When Things Fall Apart, on that topic. And there's also a beautiful book by Thich Nhat Hanh on the life of the Buddha, which is a really wonderful read and very long if you've got a lot of time. It's called Old Path, White Clouds. So that book is very soothing, and that's something you could probably read to children above 10 as well. So that would be a wonderful informal, if you just sat down every day and read a chapter from that book, that nourishes a lot of, it talks a lot about peace and mindfulness and the Buddha's life. So you really get to know the Buddha not just as a so-called saint, but as a human being on a very human level. So inspiring yourself in that way by contemplating the life of the Buddha, how he dealt with difficulties, because in the time of the Buddha, there was also a famine, and the monks said, should we leave? Should we move on? And the Buddha said, no, stay and show your solidarity with the people. And they ate chaff, which is like very rough oats that was meant for horses. And they just, they survived, and they, gave the people moral strength by showing resilience and equanimity in the face of difficulties. So somebody also said, please, friends, let us know if you want us to keep going longer. We probably should round up soon. But there is another question. When, in times where there's many restrictions on what we can do, we're not allowed to go out, how can we practice contentment, being content and accepting that you can't always get what you want?
Yeah, well, to be honest, this is something that monastics are quite familiar with because it's a central practice of our life. Yeah, so actually see it as an opportunity to cultivate unconditional happiness, an opportunity to cultivate contentment, to see that relentless desire to get new things and have new experiences is not always a viable way to live. And as you reflect, you might realize it's never been a viable way to live. It's just that that's more apparent than ever now. But it's never been a source of happiness for us. It's just been a source of intermittent distraction and discontent. Distraction, discontent, distraction, discontent. So we're just constantly ping-ponging between two different forms of unhappiness. It doesn't need to be that way. So now we have a externally imposed opportunity to cultivate contentment. And a lot of people are suddenly discovering that their strategy, which they've been using all along, is not accessible to them anymore. And that means coming to face their own mind. And look at your own mind. What is it? Not the objects of mind, not the desires, not the thoughts, not the emotions, but the mind itself. What is it? What is that vast ocean, that open sky, which all these desires, all this discontent, all this yearning is passing through? What is that vast open sky, that limitless ocean? What is the mind itself? Because that's always peaceful. And it doesn't need anything, and it doesn't yearn for anything, and it's totally fine with things exactly as they are. So you can start to get in touch with that, because that's always accessible. It's never anywhere other than here and now. That said, once again, if one's meditation practice is not well developed, it's hard to get in touch with that vast, spacious, still mind. So actually the best way to cultivate contentment in this time, do a lot of meditation. There's really no getting around it. This really, really, really helps. It helps tremendously. And yeah, really ask yourself, do you have your basic needs? So the Buddha said there's 4 basic needs. We need clothing, we need food, we need somewhere to sleep and sit, and we need medicines, medical support. So ask ourselves, do we have the bare minimum to get by? So the bare minimum for clothing is rags. Do you have rags? Great. You're good. You're set to go. Bare minimum for food is whatever leftovers, discarded leftovers that people give you. So alms food for monastics. But for lay people, it's like, well, what do you have in your pantry right now? Do you have a box of pasta? Okay, you're set. Do you have a bag of rice? All right, no problem. So we don't necessarily need to have a bunch of fancy special food. We don't need to go out to the grocery store every 2 days to see what new exciting things we can put in our bodies. We just need to have food that helps us survive. And do we have somewhere to live? Doesn't matter if it's fancy or not. Doesn't matter if it's big or small. Do you have a place to live? Great, good for you. That's good enough. Medicine, well, I live in the US where that's actually not guaranteed. But hey, you make do with what you've got. So actually, if you're not sick, you don't need any medicine. If you are sick, then you do the best you can with what's available. So when you reflect in this way, then you realize contentment is accessible because not only do you have enough to get by, most of us have way more than we need. And that's something to be grateful for. So then instead of craving, you can cultivate gratitude, recognizing that not only do you have enough to be content, you have enough to be incredibly grateful, overflowing with gratitude for all the good things that you have. And when you're filled with gratitude, then there's no space for discontent. And the mind becomes very happy and very peaceful. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. So I think cultivating gratitude can be a powerful way to be okay with things the way they are, as you said. And, I'm just wondering, I think in these difficult times, it's easy for the mind to become a little dark and a little uncontrolled if you're not used to meditating or you're not used to just looking at your mind all day with not many distractions. So I think not just focusing on suffering, but actually building your peace, your well-being, your self-care up to a point where your mind is equanimous and you have a certain amount of good feeling and clarity. And then when you have that clarity, you can start to open Pandora's box about suffering, sensations in the body, all the dark, juicy, messy things that actually help us grow spiritually. But if you don't have that calm abiding, that basic anapanasati foundation of mind training and meditation and resilience, it's very hard to look at all of those painful things and not feel overwhelmed or depressed or become unbalanced. Some people who go into meditation and isolation literally go crazy. In the Tibetan tradition, we have this practice of the 3-year retreat. And some people literally go crazy because just facing that without being properly prepared is not a good thing. And that's why we say you start gradually. You start with, half an hour a day of breath meditation. You build your paramis, maybe make an organic garden, offer some food to the, elderly neighbor, just, find out their phone number, put a note in their letterbox, there are little ways that you can start your spiritual practice, little contemplations you can do. It's not like you have to just dive in the deep end and start opening a lot of trauma and suffering you may not be ready to look at. But if you are, that's fantastic. But, go at your own pace. And in this time where there is a lot of anxiety and fear, it does help to be a light unto yourself, to cultivate that peace, to remember what is good, to remember that this too shall pass. We've had so many epidemics and wars, and it's just that our generation has been a little bit spoiled and not seen these things like a war or an epidemic, But my great-grandfather died in the Spanish flu epidemic. My grandfather fought in the First World War. So, yes, I'm older than I look, I know. So I think these are all things to consider. And unless there are any more questions, we might wrap up. So thank you so much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I do just want to point out one thing, which is I've noticed that these days in the Western world, people are talking about deadly viruses infecting large numbers of people as though this is something new or unusual. And conveniently forgetting that last I checked, about 25% of Africa has HIV. No, not true anymore?
No, I'm shocked. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Most people, they just forget because it's become much more treatable and manageable in the West, but it's still completely ravaging Africa. And we just don't think about it because it's not touching us the way it was 20, 30 years ago before they started to figure out treatment methods. So pandemic is actually something that's been happening all through our life. It's just been happening somewhere else to other people. What's changed is not pandemics. What's changed is how close it is to us. So this is also reminding us to not be too fixated on ourselves, but also to look out and acknowledge what others are going through and to see what we can do to help. See what we can do to be of benefit to others. One thing that's been pointed out, so with the Ebola outbreak, one of the reasons why it didn't become a pandemic was because governments from other countries, the US at that time being one of the countries that was doing something about it, went to the source country and tried to help out as soon as possible. So it never got a chance to spread because people in other countries cared, even though it didn't directly affect them. So when we care about other people, then we can stop problems while they're small, before they turn into big problems. And the same thing could have happened here. Ayya Soma mentioned earlier, it's been this domino effect of first it was Italy saying, oh, it won't happen to us, and then it happened to Italy. Then it was Spain and France saying, oh, it won't happen to us, and then it was Spain and France. And then it was the US saying, oh, it won't happen to us, and now the US is the world leader. Number one, as always, but not always in the best way. So what's happening is every country was saying, oh, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. But there's no such thing as somebody else's problem. It's always our problem, which means we have the opportunity to help out. We have the opportunity to do something beneficial for not just ourselves, but for all beings.
Thank you, Bhante. Ayya Soma, do you have anything to add?
After what Bhante said, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what he said.
Okay.
There's always an opportunity to help. But we can also actually, to echo also what you were saying earlier, thank you, Ayya, for sharing, that we can start with small things, just caring, practicing to care about our immediate neighbors, our immediate community, and then expanding it. No different than when we, practice metta meditation. We normally start with evocating the image of one person, and then we expand it to the neighborhood and the city and the whole world and all beings. So in the same way, I think this can be the way where we can all practice compassion, kindness, caring for others, like small little steps.
Thank you, Ayya. So thank you to Sutta Central and DharmaNet for organizing this wonderful conference, and to our dear lay friends for attending. Thank you to all teachers and people who volunteered their time. I think, it is a chance, as Bhante Suddhaso said, to develop empathy because, in fact, 40,000 children die every day due to poverty-related illness. We're suddenly disturbed by people dying because it's people like ourselves with more privilege, usually white people. Although in America, it's disproportionately affecting people of color. And if you hate being trapped at home, think about the girls who are pushed into child marriage. Several hundred a day are pushed into child marriage. They're stuck at home. They can't go outside. Their autonomy is completely taken away from them. And, think about what you could do when the economy is back up and running, that you could do to make a difference in the life of a child or someone who's suffering. And, you know, there are positive outcomes as well. You know, do we want things to go back to running at the headless chicken pace? Because we can see, for example, our life is more simple. So we have actually many people have spoken about having more time for family and enjoying their families, relating with them. They've talked about the joy of just, you know, sitting back with a good book or walking in nature, simple joys that actually don't cost money and don't damage the environment. More time for what's important. We've also seen, you know, the Himalayas are visible for the first time in northern India, the first time in 30 years, you know, and our carbon footprint has been drastically reduced. So, you know, go back and think, wow, I'm actually quite content with a peaceful mind. And do I need to go back to a life of meaningless busyness, you know, just filling up the space so I don't need to look at my own mind and deal with what's going on inside? So I hope you've enjoyed this conference, and I look forward to seeing you tonight at 8 p.m. Hopefully we won't have so many technical difficulties, and for the future days that will follow with many exciting speakers and topics. Thank you so much. Namo Buddhaya. May all beings be happy.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.